When everything finally falls into place, there's a strange kind of silence, like the world is holding its breath, waiting for you to realize that you finally made it. That's exactly how I felt standing in my brand new apartment. After 6 long years of relentless work, I could finally say it. I owned my own home. No mortgage, no rent, just mine. My name is Rachel, I'm 29, and this is my story. I remember the day I got promoted 2 years ago like it was yesterday. My boss called me into his office, and I braced myself, thinking I was about to get fired. Instead, he slid a contract across the desk, a new position, a significantly higher salary. That moment changed everything. From that day forward, I lived like a monk. No fancy clothes, no takeout, no impulsive Amazon purchases. Every single cent went into my savings account. But I won't lie, it wasn't just my discipline that made this apartment possible. A year ago, my grandmother, the only real parental figure I ever had, passed away. She left me $150,000 in her will. That money, combined with my savings, meant I could finally stop dreaming and start house hunting. And then I found this place. A cozy 2-bedroom apartment in a great part of town. Not too big, not too small, just perfect. When I told the realtor I wanted to pay in full, she actually did a double take. The look on her face when I signed those papers? Priceless. I couldn't help myself. The moment I got the keys, I took 1,000,000 photos and posted them online. My friends went crazy in the comments. Rachel, this is amazing. Living the dream. When's the housewarming party? It felt incredible to have so many people genuinely happy for me. And then my phone rang. I saw the name on the screen. Dad. My stomach dropped. Rachel, he said, his voice as dry as sandpaper. I need you to come over for lunch next Saturday. That call dragged me right back to everything I had been trying to forget. See, my mom died when I was 9. Cancer. It ripped our family apart. But my dad, he didn't stay single for long. Within a year, he married Karen, and a year later, they had my half-sister. Karen never liked me. Even before she had her own kid, she barely tolerated me. But after that, it was over. New rules, new expectations. And funny enough, they only applied to me. Rachel, you need to be quieter. Rachel, you can't have friends over. Rachel, turn that music down right now. Meanwhile, my half-sister Emily got everything. New clothes, she got them first. Latest toys? They were hers before she could even ask. Family trips? Planned around her schedule. I became a ghost in my own home, floating through the hallways while my dad and Karen doted on their real child. Thank God for Grandma Evelyn. I don't think I would have survived those years without her. As things got worse at home, I spent more and more time at her house. She lived just 15 minutes away by bike, and her door was always open for me. At Grandma's, I wasn't an outsider. My cousins, Josh, Claire, and little Tommy, were there often too. Unlike my half-sister, they actually treated me like family. But back at Dad's house, things just got worse. Emily turned into a nightmare. She'd hide my things, accidentally spill drinks on my homework, spread rumors about me at school, and somehow, I was always the one who got blamed. Rachel, why are you making your sister upset? Karen would demand. Rachel, stop antagonizing Emily, Dad would echo, never even bothering to hear my side. The day I got my college acceptance letter was the happiest day of my life. Not just because of the school, but because it meant I could finally leave. The college was 3 states away, and Grandma helped pay what my partial scholarship didn't cover. For the first time, I could breathe. For the first time, I was free. After graduation, I had to return to my home state. I had a job offer from Thompson Mills, and it was too good to pass up. I assumed I'd stay with Dad and Karen until I found my own place. But Karen quickly shut that down. Oh, we gave your room to Emily, she said with fake sympathy when I called. She needs the extra space for her things. You understand, don't you? Dad didn't say a single word to defend me. Not one? Thankfully, Grandma welcomed me with open arms. I stayed with her while I started my new job. After a few months, I saved enough to rent a tiny apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Then, a year ago, Grandma passed away. It was sudden, a stroke in her sleep. She left her house to my cousins, which made sense since they lived closer and had always helped maintain it. To me, she left $150,000, money she had been saving her whole life. For the granddaughter who reminds me so much of her mother. That was the money that helped me buy my dream home. And in the past year, Dad and his perfect little family hadn't bothered much with me. They didn't even invite me for Christmas. Not that I was surprised. I spent it with Aunt Sarah and my cousins instead. And honestly, it was the best Christmas I'd had in years. But now, Dad was calling me again, and I had a bad feeling about it. That Saturday, I drove to their house with a knot in my stomach. The closer I got to their neighborhood, the tighter my chest became. When I rang the doorbell, I counted the seconds until someone answered. Dad opened the door, his face unreadable. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "No hello. No how are you. Just, come in." They were all waiting in the living room. Karen perched on her favorite armchair like a queen on her throne. Emily sprawled across the couch, tapping away on her phone. Karen barely acknowledged me with a nod. Emily didn't even look up. Dad cleared his throat, twice. Then he spoke. "Emily has graduated high school," he announced, as if this was breaking news. "She's enrolled in the local college." I nodded, not sure where this was going. Was I supposed to congratulate her? Send her a graduation gift? I hadn't even been invited to the ceremony. "She needs somewhere to live," Dad continued, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere above my head. "Your apartment would be perfect." I blinked. "Wait, what?" "I'm not looking for a roommate," I said slowly. Dad shook his head. "You misunderstand, Rachel. We're not asking you to let Emily live with you. We're asking you to give her your apartment." I actually laughed. A short, sharp sound that died the moment I saw their faces. They were serious. They were actually serious. "Give her my apartment?" I repeated, certain I had misheard. "As in, give up my home? The one I just bought? The one I worked years to afford?" Dad nodded, as if this was the most reasonable request in the world. "Yes." Karen leaned forward, her eyes gleaming like a predator that had cornered its prey. "Think about it, Rachel," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're a single woman living alone in a 2-bedroom apartment. Meanwhile, poor Emily is struggling to find affordable housing near her college." Emily, who still hadn't looked up from her phone, let out a dramatic sigh. "I don't see why she's making such a big deal out of this." I turned to Dad, waiting for him to snap out of it, to realize how insane this conversation was. But he just crossed his arms and gave me that disappointed father look. "Emily deserves it more than you do." Something inside me snapped. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Dad said, his voice hard. "You wouldn't even have that apartment if it weren't for your grandmother's money. That wasn't your hard-earned cash, it was a gift. You don't need it. Emily does." I stared at him, my entire body shaking. This man, who had ignored me for years, who had stood by while his wife and daughter treated me like an outsider, who hadn't even invited me for Christmas. And now, he wanted me to hand over my home like it was nothing. I took a deep breath. "No." The word came out stronger than I expected. Karen let out a horrified gasp, like I had just slapped her. "Rachel, don't be so selfish." Dad's face darkened. "You're really going to refuse to help your own sister?" That was it. That was the moment I realized there was nothing left to salvage. I pushed my chair back, standing so fast it nearly tipped over. "Are you all completely insane?" I demanded. "I'm not giving up my apartment, not now, not ever. That place is mine. I bought it. I own it. I live there. And if Emily needs a place to stay, maybe she should ask her real father for help." A heavy silence fell over the room. I saw Karen's eyes widen in shock. Emily's head snapped up, her phone finally forgotten. But it was Dad's face that made my stomach drop. The way the blood drained from his cheeks, the way his fingers tightened into fists at his sides. He knew, or at least he suspected, and I had just planted the seed of doubt. The next morning, my phone rang. "Dad." I let it go to voicemail. He called again, and again. By the 5th call, I finally answered. "Rachel," he said, his voice tight. "You need to stop this nonsense." "Stop what?" I asked, feigning innocence. "This ridiculous accusation about Emily's father. You're being cruel, and I won't tolerate it." I smirked, even though he couldn't see it. "I didn't accuse anyone of anything, Dad." Silence. I could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice when he spoke again. "Rachel, I mean it. You're being unreasonable. Emily is your sister. She needs you." I let out a bitter laugh. Now you want to talk about family. Where was this family spirit when Karen kicked me out of my own room? When Emily made my life hell? When you ignored me for years? Dad sighed, as if I was the unreasonable one. Rachel, listen to me. If you don't sign over the apartment, I'll have no choice but to write you out of my will. I paused. Then I laughed. I actually laughed. Good, I said, still chuckling. Now I don't have to pretend to care about you anymore. And I hung up. A week passed. I went on with my life, ignoring every call from my father. Then, at my housewarming party, my cousin Josh pulled me aside. Hey, Rachel, I need to show you something. He held out his phone, hesitating before handing it to me. I was at Lorenzo's last night with some friends. Look who I saw in the back booth. The first photo made my heart stop. There was Karen, sitting in a dimly lit restaurant booth, with a man I had never seen before. His arm was around her, and they were kissing. Not a friendly peck, the kind of kiss that left zero doubts about what was happening. More photos followed. Karen, laughing. Karen, holding the man's hand. Karen, letting him feed her dessert like they were some lovesick teenagers. 20 years of deception. My father's entire marriage was built on a lie. And it got worse. Because when I looked up the man's name on Facebook, I found something else. A photo from 15 years ago. A picnic. Karen, sitting on a blanket. A man beside her. The same man. Robert Mitchell. The caption? Perfect Sunday afternoon with the people I love most. And in the background, barely in frame, a blurry little girl with dark hair playing in the grass. Emily. I stared at the photo. Then, slowly, I pulled up a recent picture of Emily. And I finally saw it. The same nose, the same smile, the same damn eyes. Emily wasn't my father's daughter. She had never been his daughter. 2 days later, I walked into a DNA testing facility with 2 plastic bags in my purse. One contained Emily's hair, taken from her brush at my father's house. The other, Dad's hair from his comb. I paid $2,000 for rush processing. When the envelope arrived, my hands trembled as I tore it open. And there it was. The alleged father is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. The probability of paternity is 0%. I stared at the paper. Then I smiled. Because my father was about to learn the truth. And this time, he had no one to blame but himself. I sat there staring at the DNA results. 0% probability. Emily was not my father's daughter. My hands were steady as I folded the papers and slipped them back into the envelope. For 2 decades, Karen had played her role perfectly. The doting wife, the caring stepmother, the woman who convinced my father to turn his back on his own daughter for a child that wasn't even his. And now it was all about to fall apart. I was going to make sure of it. That evening, my phone rang again. Dad. I almost didn't answer. But then, I decided it was time. Rachel, we need to talk, he said. His voice was calm, measured. I could tell he thought he still had control over me. Not anymore. Sure, I said. How about dinner at your place? Saturday? There was a pause. Then, that's a good idea. Good. Because after Saturday, his life would never be the same. When I arrived, they were all waiting in the living room, just like before. Dad, Karen, Emily. Karen was smug, already convinced she'd won. Emily barely glanced up from her phone. Dad cleared his throat. Rachel, I hope you've come to your senses about the apartment. I smiled. Actually, Dad, I wanted to give you something first. I pulled the envelope from my bag and handed it to him. What's this? Read it. He opened it. His eyes moved across the page. Then he froze. I watched the color drain from his face as he reached the last line. The alleged father is excluded as the biological father of the tested child. The probability of paternity is 0%. The paper shook in his hands. What the hell is this? He whispered. Karen let out a shaky laugh. Rachel, what is this nonsense? She snapped. You expect us to believe some forged... I held up my phone and tapped the screen. The photos appeared, Karen and Robert Mitchell, locked in an embrace, her hands tangled in his shirt, his fingers stroking her cheek. I turned the phone to my father. Believe it now? The room went silent. Dad turned to Karen. Is this true? Karen's face twisted. David, please, I can explain. Don't. He cut her off, his voice sharp as a knife. Just tell me the truth. Is Emily my daughter? Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Emily, panic filling her eyes. But Emily, she was still staring at her phone, her face completely unreadable. Finally, Karen whispered, No. Dad staggered back like she had physically struck him. 20 years. His voice broke. You let me raise her for 20 years. I felt nothing watching him crumble, nothing but satisfaction, because now he finally knew what it felt like to be discarded, just like he did to me. Karen begged, she pleaded. She swore she had always loved Dad, that she had made a mistake. David, it didn't mean anything. I chose you. You were the better father for her. Dad didn't even look at her. Instead, he turned to Emily. How long have you known? His voice was hollow. Emily finally set her phone down. She met his eyes without flinching. Since I was 13. Dad recoiled like she had slapped him. You knew, and you never told me? Emily shrugged. It wasn't my problem. I almost laughed. Even now, Emily was exactly the same person she had always been. Selfish, entitled, indifferent to anyone who wasn't useful to her. Dad looked destroyed. His perfect little world had just burned to the ground. Get out. His voice was quiet, but sharp as steel. Karen's eyes widened. What? I said get out. Karen froze. Then she turned to Emily. Come on, sweetheart, let's go. But Emily didn't move. I'm not going anywhere, she said. You should go, Mom. Karen stared at her, stunned. Then, realization dawned. Emily had no loyalty to anyone but herself. And now that Dad was the one with the money and the house, she was choosing him. Karen's breath hitched. Then she turned back to Dad, desperation in her eyes. David, please. We're done. Silence. Then Karen let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Fine, she spat. I hope you're happy, Rachel. I smiled. I am. And then I walked out of that house for the last time. The next week passed in a blur. I heard things, of course. Karen had moved in with Robert Mitchell. Emily had stayed with Dad. Dad had filed for divorce within 48 hours. He also cut off Emily's college payments. Why should I pay for another man's child? He had said. For the first time in 20 years, he finally saw Emily for what she was, and she hated it. I got a text from her a few days later. Emily, hope you're happy, Beach. I didn't respond, because she was no longer my problem. A week after everything, Dad called me. I almost ignored it, but in the end, I answered. Can we meet? He asked. Please. I agreed. We met at a coffee shop. Dad looked older, tired. He stirred his coffee in silence before finally speaking. I've been a terrible father to you. I didn't argue, because he was right. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued, but I want to try, if you'll let me. I sipped my coffee. I thought about everything. The years of neglect, the betrayal, the fact that if Emily had been his biological child, he never would have cared about me. And then I said, we'll see. Because forgiveness isn't something you can demand. It's something you earn. And as for Karen and Emily, I haven't seen them since, and I never will.